It is said that there was a killer whom people called the Bee Killer, because this person always left the letter B at the crime scene. That night, there were two men chasing to assassinate a girl, and unfortunately for them, just as they were about to act, the Bee Killer appeared. The next morning, we meet the main character Koku, who is actually that mysterious Bee Killer. He usually goes to work at Lily's house. She is a member of the investigation team and is rushing to go to work. But as soon as she leaves, she has to turn back because she forgot her documents. Lily then arrived at work and learned that Bee had caused another incident. Walking around, she noticed a stranger at the scene. She didn't know who this man in black was and thought he was some drunk uncle who had wandered onto the scene. But the boss informed her that this person was a genius. When they returned to the police station, their superiors told them that this man was Keith Flick, a genius who had disappeared for 10 years and had now returned. Keith will help them solve this case. The victims this time were 3 mentally ill brothers who had kidnapped and abused a girl, and the girl is currently being treated in the hospital. 2 of them were dead and 1 was missing, and their job was to investigate the killer named B who had killed these 2 mentally ill men. The boss suspected that this person had been involved in 15 cases in recent years. The method of killing was simple, a fatal stab that killed the victim instantly. Keith fell asleep during the briefing of the case, but when he saw the B symbol, he realized something. Meanwhile, the remaining mentally ill man had stolen a military vehicle and started causing chaos in the city. Keith went to meet his old friend, the doctor. After chatting about old times for a while, Keith left and threw a pack of cigarettes to the doctor. The news about the mentally ill man driving a tank and causing chaos quickly reached the police. They quickly mobilized people to handle it, but all the information in the police station had been overheard by Koku, who set out to act. While the police were sending cars to chase the tank, he kept firing on the road to lure the Bee Killer to appear. Lily drove her car to chase and overtake to stop the tank, but it was useless. Another car chased, but the tank entered a tunnel and then fired out. When the police exited the tunnel, no one knew where the tank had disappeared to. The police station began to think and understand that the tank had an engine that could resist detection sensors. Keith had just woken up, and after reviewing everything, he began to draw a long formula and finally concluded that this was a robbery disguised as a riot. He then narrowed down the area and asked what was underneath the tunnel. Below it was an abandoned subway line. Understanding the problem, the police sent people to investigate the old train station and another team to the aviation museum, telling them to closely monitor the sky. Meanwhile, a train had been hijacked by the mentally ill man and his helper. Koku had already found them and forced the mentally ill man and the red-haired man to come up to greet him. The mentally ill man was just a pawn in this plan, so he was eliminated immediately. The accomplices of the red-haired man had stolen a balloon, so they decided to abandon the red-haired man as well. The red-haired man now realized that Koku was the Black-Winged King, a powerful being and not human. Meanwhile, the investigation team had already found the location of the tank, but it had been abandoned by the others and there were no clues inside. Koku had already given the red-haired man a mark on his forehead, causing him to charge forward, resulting in a sword through his head. He then vanished without a trace, while Koku, after finishing his work, spread his wings and flew away. The next morning, the investigation team went to the overturned train, and Keith realized he had been wrong on one point. They had returned the tank to the military, and the military requested the investigation team to close the case and just view it as a train derailment. However, the press discovered that the overturned train had formed the shape of the letter B, so the case still couldn't be closed. The mastermind who had stolen the balloon realized he had found what he was looking for, while Koku would continue to leave his mark until that person found him. Somewhere, a person in a yellow coat was planning to use a rabbit for an experiment for their plan. But the accomplices had knocked out the yellow-coated man and put him into the machine to turn him into an experimental subject instead of the rabbit. That person tried to scream in vain and then went through a terrible death. One of the balloon thieves was behind this. Koku was now working as a violin craftsman at Lily's house. He had a talent for music that made the boss's son wonder why he chose to be a craftsman instead of becoming a musician. To the boss, Koku was the kind of child from another family that he often compared his own son to. At the police station, they were investigating an organization called Market Maker, a group that controlled criminals and wars. Under royal orders, they carried out secret activities such as assassinations, sabotage, and infiltration. The right hand of each member was tattooed with a skull, but it was an organization that had fallen into oblivion. The entire investigation team was then called to investigate. This time, the crime scene had many corpses, and there were still traces of the letter B left behind. Keith then arrived, but he had cut his hair and looked less messy, causing Lily not to recognize him. Keith looked at the B symbol at the scene and noticed that this was not caused by the B killer because it was too elaborate. No one understood what Keith meant. Boss Eric was then called to look at the attic. Here they discovered a dried-up corpse. Upon examination, this body died due to toxic gas poisoning. The doctor found that this type of poison seemed to be a combination of several different types. The effect didn't occur quickly, but also wasn't too slow, and surely the perpetrator wanted the victim to die in great pain. There was almost no cure, as this was an improved type, so it would take some time to research before an antidote could be created. But the chances of success were not very high since the doctor himself was not the creator of the poison. So he advised Keith to tell Eric to find the culprit before he used that poison for terrorism. The doctor asked Keith if he had been searching for that person for 7 years. Keith hadn't given up, but had leads to find that person. Meanwhile, the investigation team had learned the motive of the perpetrator. That person had killed a politician's family with toxic gas and might target a high-level official's party next. Since there was no antidote yet, they needed to prepare very carefully. The dried-up corpse was identified as a senior researcher who had gone missing 6 months ago. This person might have created the toxic gas and was eliminated when no longer valuable. Eric then had people investigate whether any research department had recently lost materials or equipment for making toxic gas. The others went to the party hall to tighten security there and check all suspicious people. To avoid causing panic, they were not allowed to say anything about the toxic gas. Meanwhile, Koku heard that he was being blamed for the murder of the senator and his family. He cut his own hand to ask permission from the boss to leave early. At the hall, many police had arrived to monitor the party. Lily was drooling at the food, causing others to tell her to focus. No one had seen anything suspicious yet. Koku had also disguised himself to sneak in here. At the party, Warren received attention from many people. Side note, this Warren's outfit was very expensive. A genuine outfit would be worth as much as a brand-name car. The balloon thieves had also blended in here to terrorize. On the surveillance side, the blonde Kayla had set up a gesture and action monitoring machine. If anyone showed any unusual signs, even slightly, they would be detected. Eric had her monitor and control the actions of others. He then asked everyone how it was, and in all areas, there were guards and checks with no strange signs. At the front gate, the only strange thing was Keith. He tried to line up, but was hit by a car and flew into the fountain. But in one area, the police had been killed by a criminal who imitated their voice to deceive others. He had planted a poison gas bomb here and left in a waiter's outfit. The balloon thieves had now begun to act. That Warren was one of them, and she had started to read something. Koku discovered this and decided to keep an eye on her. The blonde man was now detected as suspicious. Others quickly ran over and stopped him before he could stab an official with a knife. They only thought he was using poison gas as a threat, but he actually used a knife. When he realized the investigation team was also here, he shouted to alert his accomplices. The accomplices immediately cut the power to the entire hall. The blonde Mario, who had just caught this person, interrogated him about what he had just done. He revealed that he and his accomplices had taken control of this place. At 9 o'clock, the poison gas would spread and kill the entire city. If anyone wanted to live and stop it, they had to kill the mayor. Everyone panicked and demanded to break the doors to escape. Mario thought this person was crazy, but he didn't care because this would be the most spectacular tragedy of his life, and this terrorist act would be mentioned later. His name would be remembered forever, while the victims and police like them would not. He mocked Mario and called him a nobody. Meanwhile, Sister Kayla in the monitoring room was struggling to hack back into the system and wanted everyone to be quiet and not rush her. Mario realized this guy was very unlucky to have angered Kayla. During this time, Koku had followed the Warren outside. This Warren revealed her identity as the mastermind behind the two who created the poison gas. He said he needed Koku's body but didn't need him to be alive. The two sides then engaged in combat, and this one was not as easy as the red-haired man from before. Koku then asked who they were, but he didn't answer and instead grabbed a nearby skateboard to escape. He glided on the building wall and then landed to continue running. Keith realized this and ran to hijack a car from a colleague to chase after them. Meanwhile, Koku and the other person had chased each other to a mountain road. The two sides were constantly close to each other. The skateboarder tried to use a gun to attack, but Koku kept dodging because he knew he had information about the person he needed to find. He then slid down the mountain and informed his accomplices that the king had landed and continued the chase. He then threw a bomb, and we returned to the police side. Kayla had gradually overpowered the person hacking into the system. When it started to get messy, the balloon thieves people stepped in to eliminate this person because he wasn't being useful. The resistance stopped, so Kayla regained control of the system and helped the people inside escape, while also helping the bomb disposal team. But the leader had activated the gas release immediately. The gas began to spread throughout the hall and many people inhaled it. The entire investigation team couldn't escape in time. Eric told Kayla to divert the gas to empty rooms using the ventilation system, saying he would take responsibility if there were any mistakes. He then called Keith, who thought the poison gas was fake because this incident was just set up by two narcissists. They didn't have the guts to endure that painful poison gas, so it must have been just anesthetic gas. And the two perpetrators of this incident seemed to have been taken over by another criminal group, and this group behind them was aiming for a different target. Keith noticed a crazy circle was about to unfold. The balloon thieves had now gathered. They did everything just to serve one purpose, which was to bring the black-winged king back to them. Meanwhile, Koku had been lured to a lake. Here, the white-haired man told him how meaningful this place was, but he ignored his words and only wanted to know where that girl was. He knew Koku saw that girl as the light of his life, because Koku's memories had almost disappeared and right now he was lost and didn't know what the meaning of his life was. He brought Koku here to make him remember everything. Some images appeared, causing him to transform and rush to attack. He now realized one thing, that the person who locked Koku's memories was none other than Koku himself. Koku wanted to forget everything that happened that day, and he would not forgive Koku for daring to forget him. Keith still didn't know what he was really chasing. As for the battle on the other side, after a few back and forth glides, Koku was the winner. He successfully stabbed the white-haired man in the heart, and he told Koku to cut off his left leg because it would be useful at some point. He then gave Koku a clue related to a constellation and then passed away. Meanwhile, the investigation team had woken up. They had indeed inhaled anesthetic gas, but the real gas containers were also found. However, on the wall where the gas containers were, two human skins had been pasted. Keith and his colleague had arrived at the lake from earlier, but it seemed they were too late. Lily now felt that the recent cases were somehow related, and they couldn't solve anything. But Mario recited the oath they took when they became police officers. Mario believed they just needed to solve the upcoming cases, and somehow the clues would lead them to the final answer, so thinking aimlessly now was useless. Years ago, the person Keith loved had been brutally murdered. He had been very depressed during that time, but all ways to find the killer of his loved one led to dead ends. Koku was on his way to the library when Lily gave him a ride. Lily kept asking if he had a girlfriend, but he diverted the conversation to why she wasn't at work today. However, she kept asking about his type to introduce someone to him. Keith was also at the library, where the librarian informed him that his library card and ID had expired a year ago. Koku asked Lily about the star name that the white-haired man had told him, and she guided him thoroughly, as her high school boyfriend was very interested in astronomy, so she knew a little. Keith was still dealing with the paperwork. Koku had just arrived at the library when Keith was just walking out. Suddenly, Koku remembered the words of the white-haired man and turned back to check, while Keith had just fallen right outside. Keith then returned to his apartment to find the elevator broken, so he had to take the stairs. When he reached his room, he found Lily there. She had business and wanted to meet Keith, but he wanted her to leave. She stubbornly stayed, so Keith had to let her in. Keith then cooked food while Lily took out the file on the bee killer and read it to him. He seemed uninterested but listened fully without interrupting. Lily found it strange that recently the bee killer hadn't caused attention-grabbing cases like before. Keith gave her a bowl of soup he cooked and asked her to leave after eating. Boris, his colleague downstairs, recognized Lily's car and discovered she was in Keith's house, suspecting something shady between them. Lily then expressed what she was confused about in her head, and she thought Keith could answer it. She then showed him examples using cakes, using each cake to illustrate the cases and characters in recent incidents, and the result was a mess with no apparent connection to each other. But she believed Keith could explain this. He wanted her to rearrange this mess before asking, but because she couldn't, that's why she came to ask Keith. He wanted her to apologize to the cakes and the baker who made them for daring to play with food like this. He had thought Lily was a fool, but didn't expect her to realize that there was a third force controlling everything from the shadows. Currently, things were balanced, but when the darkness gradually disappeared, this force would act. This force would swallow everything, and they could only helplessly watch without being able to do anything. Keith then swept everything away and wanted Lily to stop getting involved in this case. He thought this wasn't a case that a curious person like her could get involved in. She refused, angering Keith. Boris heard something and barged in to find Keith being pinned down by Lily. Lily then had to explain that it was because Keith slipped and fell. Suddenly Kayla arrived because Boris said there was something interesting here. Mario was also about to arrive. Boris had explained that it was because he didn't know how to use the phone. Kayla didn't know why the door was broken. Meanwhile, the mysterious force now needed to use some kind of serum to maintain their power. They were quite frustrated because capturing Koku was still delayed, and even a talented person like the white-haired man had lost his life. Boris was now being blamed by Keith for turning his house into a party house. He asked what Keith thought about Lily, and he said straight out that she was like a fool. But even though Lily was foolish, she still understood many things, and she had many characteristics very similar to the person Keith once loved. Meanwhile, at the office, Bran, a member of the investigation team, discovers a file in the records that logs actions and realizes there's a recording of himself at this very moment, captured from his own phone. Startled, Bran leaves without telling his colleagues anything. He then calls Mr. Boris and learns they are at Keith's house. They ask Bran to come, but Bran now suspects he's being targeted and is wary of everyone and everything. Bran then decides to go to Keith's house to regroup with everyone. Koku has now reached a polluted area and found the star that the white-haired man directed him to, but still doesn't understand his intention. Meanwhile, Bran has been killed in the elevator, and there's another bee there. When the investigation team arrives, they notice that the elevator camera was disconnected during Bran's attack. There's suspicion that someone from the police department is responsible. At the hospital, the doctor informs them that Bran was saved in time and is still alive. Upon examination, there are no signs of struggle, so the doctor thinks Bran was attacked by someone standing right next to him and couldn't react. The doctor then reveals that before losing consciousness, Bran asked him to give this watch to Keith. Eric later hears that Bran has survived the critical condition and won't have lasting effects, except for a slight twinge when the weather changes. This could be considered a miracle. Eric wants Lily to keep Bran's condition a secret because they can't trust anyone outside the investigation team. Koku and Lily's family have gone to deliver a newly crafted violin to a customer. Suddenly, Koku sees Keith and suspects he might be the lead he needs. Since returning from the hospital, Keith has been behaving strangely, causing Lily to keep asking questions. Kayla is then informed by Eric about Bran's condition and is asked to keep quiet. Keith later calls and asks her to keep their conversation confidential. He asks her to transfer information about the names he's about to mention into his computer. After finishing, she demands payment and continues her work. Suddenly, Kayla finds something related to Bran. Keith and Lily have returned to the police station. Koku has also sneaked in after them, using his super speed to bypass security. On the way, Lily is pulled into the bathroom by Kayla to discuss matters. The masterminds are now in hiding, and the most savage member of the group has asked for more serum and decided to wait for news from the mole in the police department. If things go wrong now, they'll deal with that person. Internal conflict arises between this savage member and the female assistant of the commander, arguing about the scarcity of the drug and its weakening effects while he keeps using it wastefully. Kayla is assigned the task of recovering data from Bran's damaged computer. She then shows Lily information about 2 police department employees, as well as files of many others. Each file contains a video recording of that person. Kayla opens Lily's file and explains that this application allows the owner to infiltrate any device capable of recording to capture images, whether the device is on or off. They'll find out who's behind this as soon as they uncover all the secrets from Bran's computer. They also discuss Keith and the list Kayla gave him earlier of employees related to the investigation team in the past 5 years. Suddenly, Kayla's computer shuts down, and they suspect the mastermind has discovered them. Lily suggests finding Keith because he might be able to do something. Keith has gone to meet the doctor, with Koku nearby eavesdropping. The doctor is quite happy that Bran has been saved, while Keith still complains about the terrible coffee the doctor offers. The doctor once thought about finding a medicine to cure Keith's disagreeable nature. After chatting for a while, Keith decides to go catch the culprit. Meanwhile, the savage member of the group is starting to have withdrawal symptoms due to lack of drugs. Suddenly, some thugs approach and try to rob him, forcing him to show them who's really strong here. A bespectacled young man from the group arrives to intervene and injects him with the drug. When the police arrive later, he shows a tattoo that makes the police obey, and through this tattoo, we learn that this group is the market maker that Bran once showed Kayla. After that, Lily went to the office where only one colleague remained. She asked him if he had seen Keith, and he informed her that Keith had just stopped by but had already left. He had asked Lily to deliver something for him. Meanwhile, the villain had returned to the hospital to completely eliminate Bran, but Keith was there to prevent him from doing so. He had found the answer from the watch that Bran had left behind. It was all to expose the name of this villain, who was a colleague at the police station named Jean. Keith had suspected Jean for 8 years, but had silently overlooked it. Jean would take away everything precious to Keith, just as he had done before, until there was no one close left around Keith. But instead of trying to attack Keith, he cut his own throat. Keith then met Koku and was knocked unconscious by him. Lily later arrived and discovered that Jean had died there. He was still whispering Keith's name, while Keith was now on the rooftop with Koku. As soon as they met, Keith immediately guessed that he was the assassin bee. Koku knew that Keith was what the white-haired man had guided him to, because the constellation name he mentioned was a way of referring to an older person who would guide him on the right path. Keith knew he was looking for a girl named Yuna, and that his number was 13, and the letter B he left behind was actually also the number 13. The person he was looking for was number 4, and that B had 4 strokes. Only he and that girl knew that symbol, so he continued killing to spread it and wanted Yuna to find him. He just wanted to know where Yuna was, but Keith wanted to get something in return, so he asked him to meet him at the temple on that day. Boris had now led Mario to where Keith used to work to investigate. They suspected Keith of killing Jean and wanted to arrest him for prosecution. Years ago, Keith had once arrested and interrogated a killer without permission. Lily had now gone to see the doctor to ask about Keith. Upon hearing the situation, the doctor immediately knew that Keith did not cause Jean's death, because Keith would never be so careless. From the past, Keith had always been an unpleasant person, but good people always seemed to be attracted to him and stayed by his side, and Lily was one of them. When Lily had enough information, she left, and the doctor thought she looked exactly like that person. Keith was later found by Boris, who gave him information. He knew Keith wasn't guilty, so he gave him information and took him to the temple to meet Koku. When they met, he told Koku what he had found out about him. Years ago, winged skeletons were excavated, and it was suspected that there was a being higher than humans, so they experimented on living people to turn them into higher entities. The country called for public support, but things gradually came to a standstill, so they had to use inbreeding to create promising humans, but it also led nowhere. However, a scientist came and told the king that he would change the situation. And so, those promising people were sent to become intelligence agents and became known as market makers. They killed for the government to receive protection. And at this very moment, that research had a breakthrough when it produced 2 successful entities. But a tragedy occurred, and what Koku remembered was the scene of Yuna being separated from him, and the smell of gunpowder. Koku didn't know how he found information about him, so he revealed that one of the 3 Japanese doctors who helped bring him into existence was his father, and he was the first to decipher the research at the age of 12. Suddenly, a girl came and attacked Koku. He pushed Keith away and began to fight. He continuously blocked her attacks, and their fight caused the temple's pillars to be damaged, and soon the entire temple collapsed, revealing the girl's true face. As Koku approached, Keith told him not to kill her. Memories flooded back, making him realize she was the person he had been looking for all along, Yuna. But she hated him, making him realize it was time to atone. She believed he was the one who had killed her other friends. She would never forgive him. Now he had two choices: one, die at the hands of the person he loved most, or two, take action against her. Koku wanted to explain, but Yuna wouldn't listen. Keith had to climb up here, but Yuna had stabbed Koku once. Despite this, Koku still just hugged Yuna and was happy to have found her again. Yuna now remembered Koku, recalled the happy memories with him from the past, and blamed him for disappearing for so long. But shortly after their reunion, both were pierced by the leader with a single thrust that went through both of them. Koku angrily transformed to fight him decisively. But before he could do anything to him, he was shot down by two of his subordinates. Keith had to prepare ammunition to help Koku. The savage approached Koku and stabbed him, but he kicked him away. The white-haired man made stakes fall, piercing both the savage and Koku. He then came before him and called him pathetic. As he pulled the stakes up, Koku clung to the ground, causing the stakes to be pulled out. Keith arrived and shot him once. He just stood there letting Keith shoot him, and this overconfidence taught him a lesson. The shot to his hand didn't heal, so his subordinate wanted him to stop trying to kill Keith and return for urgent treatment before it was too late. Although frustrated, he and his accomplices had to cling to the stakes to leave. Keith then took Koku back to the car and learned that he was keeping his father's notebook. His father had said that Koku would recognize his image in Keith and seek him out. Koku was now dreaming of old memories. In the past, he lived with many other special children in a castle along with Keith's father. Yuna was often bullied by other children because she was weak, and Koku always came to help her. But he couldn't win against the majority because he wasn't strong then either. He had asked Keith's father why others were so strong while he was only forbidden to use his left eye. The man believed that physical strength wasn't everything, but Koku thought it was just adults' flowery words. He believed if he didn't get stronger, he wouldn't be able to protect anyone. Yuna later pulled him aside to thank him. He didn't understand why she didn't just say it at school, but she was afraid he would be bullied again. However, he claimed he wasn't being bullied. Koku promised to always protect Yuna and showed her a secret sign. The sign he drew was number 13 representing him and Roman numeral 4 for her, which people later mistook for the letter B. That night, the school was attacked. Koku wanted to run and save Yuna, but Keith's father entrusted him to someone named Kirasame to protect Koku and take him to a safe place, while he would go find Yuna. Meanwhile, Yuna was scared and drawing the sign to call for Koku. But the white-haired Minetsuki reached her first, claiming to be Koku's brother and luring her to follow him. Koku had made it outside, but was still worried about Yuna. Kirasama said they would go to a hideout and Yuna would come later. But during this time, Keith's father had told Minetsuki to go to the hideout. However, Market Maker found them, and Minetsuki betrayed and stabbed him to join Market Maker's side. Koku was taken to the hideout, but enemies had found them, so Kirasame told him to go in first while he stayed to fight. He wanted Koku to live because he was their king. After hearing no more sounds, Koku went back outside and saw everyone had perished. He returned to the school to find no survivors. Yuna's sign left behind made him only able to apologize. He met Keith's father again, who gave him the notebook containing his information and purpose. What he needed was to find Yuna again. The man knew Koku would someday find Keith and hoped he would guide him then. Koku then returned to the hideout and decided to graft the strongest parts of his friends onto his body. Koku later woke up and told Keith that his eye had the ability to manipulate memories, and he had sealed his own memories to avoid guilt. But when he looked into Yuna's eyes, he remembered everything. Meanwhile, Eric was pressured by his superiors to find Keith as soon as possible, or his entire office would be disbanded. This police chief was collaborating with Minetsuki and gave him access to information from the police department. He remembered when he had to cut off his arm that couldn't heal, and he was cooperating with a mysterious figure. This person recognized something when he saw Keith's bullet. During that time, Keith's house had been surrounded and investigated by the police. Lily looked at Keith's pile of formulas and felt confused. The entire room was filled with formulas as if it had been painted white, and in the end, she couldn't understand what answer Keith was trying to find. Keith was fishing at that moment, and when he met Koku again, he asked Koku about a criminal in the picture. He was the one who killed his sister, but he knew he wasn't really the true culprit because he had a different method than the one who killed his sister. He didn't know who he was trying to protect, because in court, he bit his tongue and died to avoid revealing who committed the crime. Keith knew Koku recognized this person. He said he wasn't human, but was someone who had attacked his school. All the people he had dealt with before were those who had attacked the school, and his purpose was only revenge and to find Yuna. On the day he was surrounded by smoke and dust and felt desperate. He swore he would kill all of them and find Yuna at any cost. That night, Eric had investigated the market maker and called Keith. Eric had also decoded and knew who had attacked Bran, while Keith was investigating who had really killed his sister, and he was close to finding the answer. Eric wanted him to return to the police station to clear his name, but he refused because now he was closer to the truth than ever. He thanked Eric for what he had done for him and threw away the phone. The next morning, Lily called Mr. Boris to Keith's house and told him she saw red formulas on the ceiling that were complete, and after decoding, she discovered this drawing. Mr. Boris knew whose drawing this was and how it related to Keith's return after these past few years. He revealed that this was Keith's sister and she had been killed 8 years ago. Keith now knew that the group Koku was hunting were not human. They would start losing consciousness at 20 years old and needed that yellow liquid to maintain themselves. But they would become more and more insane over time, and the only way to stop them was to kill them. After hearing the explanation, Keith wanted to go find something to eat. Lily then went to see Eric and said she wanted to change the direction of the investigation. Eric wanted to listen later, but she argued that if they continued like this, they wouldn't find Keith. But Eric said she was obstructing the investigation, and if she didn't like it, she should leave her badge and go. He didn't need a fool who couldn't follow orders. Lily was furious and put down her badge and left. However, this was his intention to let Lily find Keith on her own, because he knew Lily was on the same level as Keith. So he let her go find him herself because now the whole department was being monitored by Market Maker. And to be honest, he couldn't find Keith, so he would take a gamble on Lily. Eric then went to Kayla's place to monitor where Lily was going. Mr. Boris had attached a tracker to Lily's car, and she was now going everywhere to find Keith. She followed the clues and asked people on the street. Although no one knew about Keith, she managed to find the place where Keith had sat to talk with Eric. She couldn't get any information about Keith, but then remembered the strange spices she had smelled when eating at Keith's house. Keith was now creating blue bullets. These were oxidized bullets and were the weakness of the Market Maker group. He got this knowledge from his father's notebook. Koku asked why he had been going around for the past few days, and he said he was waiting for him to recover. He pointed his sword at Keith and asked what his intentions were in finding him. He wanted him to put the sword away to avoid hindrance and then speak. Meanwhile, Eric's group was still closely following Lily's movements. Koku was telling Keith some things when he complained about being hungry and wanted to go eat. He asked Koku if he thought Yuna looked like the Yuna he knew when they first met. At first, she didn't, but later she did. So Keith had another clue. He told Koku about the 2 men he wanted to find. One of them was the person who killed his father and indirectly caused his sister's death. As for the other one, he was sure that person was human. This person had the ability to manipulate minds and control the first person, and made Koku's Yuna look so fierce when they first met. The Minatsuki group up there had found Koku's location, and one of them decided to go down and check. Minatsuki didn't allow his companions to kill Koku, so he only requested an investigation. Meanwhile, Lily was walking in the neighborhood and Keith happened to be in a nearby restaurant. Keith was thinking about the second man, while Koku promised him he would deal with the first man to avenge his father, who was also Koku's teacher. Keith then told Koku about where Market Maker was hiding his Yuna, but he was caught by Lily. Koku tried to escape but was also caught. Lily then questioned why Keith had run away, while Keith was surprised that Koku and Lily knew each other. Lily asked Koku why he was with Keith, and Keith lied that they were brothers, and he had just asked Koku for help with a few things. But Lily knew about his sister and knew why he didn't like her because she reminded him of his sister. However, if he intended to take revenge, she couldn't overlook it as a police officer. Suddenly, the person Minatsuki sent down disobeyed orders and opened fire on Keith's car. Koku had to fight while Keith said he would tell Lily the truth when they got out of there. Koku then continuously dodged bullets from the attacker and flew up to deliver a fatal blow. Keith was then arrested and taken to the station where Eric interrogated him. He explained why he had accepted getting into this mess because he needed to confirm a few things. He said he was close to finding evidence about who killed his sister 8 years ago. The person was still at large and seemed to have a control disorder, killing simply for their own desires. This person was also controlling the market maker group and was very close to them. Thanks to Lily, he had gotten off track and now wanted to search on his own. Eric yelled at him, saying Keith always tried to do things by himself instead of asking friends for help. He had learned a lot from Keith and decided to help Keith from now on. 8 years ago, he had planned to help Keith kidnap the killer to expose him, but Keith did it alone, putting Eric in a difficult position of having to arrest Keith himself. But now, in this situation, he and everyone else would be a separate team under Keith's command, because the department would be disbanded anyway, even if they caught Keith. As they were thinking about how to mislead Market Maker, Keith said he already had someone doing that for him. Keith revealed that he suspected the doctor, because from the first day they met again, he had planted a listening device in a cigarette pack and given it to the doctor. The doctor was a heavy smoker and the pack was finished in 1 day, but Keith learned that the doctor was still talking to his sister. Therefore, he would use Lily as bait. Lily then went to meet the doctor without wearing a jacket. She let the doctor see the 2-star tattoo on her back, which Keith had drawn to lure the doctor. Of course, he took the bait, and Lily also acted as if she really liked Keith, making everyone laugh when they returned to the interrogation room, while Keith blushed. The doctor still suspected this was Keith's trap, so he was a bit cautious. Minatsuki was angry at this point and was criticized by the twin of the person Koku had just killed. He got furious and strangled her to death, then threw her away. The doctor then discovered Lily waiting for the bus because her car had broken down, so he offered her a ride. Boris and Mario followed from behind. Lily looked very much like Keith's sister, so she tried to act more like her to lure the doctor. She used the same way of speaking, and talking about snow made the doctor think she was even more similar. She even put on glasses, but she made a mistake by playing modern music, which was unlike Keith's sister. This was enough for the doctor to stop seeing her as similar to Keith's sister. The doctor then drove into a car wash. Boris still had to observe from afar and follow when Lily moved. They followed all the way to the doctor's house, and Keith saw that after all these years, it hadn't changed. But inside it was very dark, and they couldn't hear anything from Lily anymore, so Boris and Mario had to go in to check. They checked the first floor and found nothing unusual, except that the place seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. They heard sounds upstairs, so they went up to check. The first few rooms had nothing until the last room where they burst in and encountered the Savage Man and one of his puppets. He had brought Lily's jacket containing the listening device and was carrying a bunch of bombs to commit suicide. They hadn't heard any news from the other side for a long time, so they were worried that something had happened. But Boris and Mario are still alive and only slightly injured. Keith realized that the doctor had replaced someone in the car wash and he had been seen through. Eric was about to issue an urgent search order, but Keith stopped him because it would only alert the target. He wants to resolve this accurately to avoid repeating past mistakes. He will not let Lily die, so don't worry. Lily has now regained consciousness and finds herself paralyzed on an operating table. Around her are the bodies of many girls who were previously captured and abused by the doctor. The doctor erased that star mark, immediately knowing this must be Keith's doing. He knows this place will soon be discovered, so he decides to make Keith regret it even if he finds this place. Koku is now waiting on the snowy mountain because Keith had once told him to stand there and jump down, then spread his wings at the right moment for the wind to blow him up to the clouds. There he will find a large hidden hot air balloon with Yuna waiting for him inside. Koku doesn't know if Yuna is still waiting for him, But Keith told him about the Holy Relic Stone that he deciphered when he was 12 years old. It has many lines of text and metaphors depending on how you read it horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. The only thing he paid attention to was about the Black-Winged King on the 13th full moon night. The man chosen by 2 priestesses gained power, comrades, and wings to become the Black-Winged King. Mission accomplished. The 2 priestesses gave him a blue sword and required him to kill one of them. The one killed would become power for the king, while the survivor would fight alongside the king. He recognized the sword was from Kirizama in the past, and the killed priestess was the white-haired one who fought him before. Noticing the familiarity, he worried about leading Yuna to her death. Keith wants him to accept fate, or if he doesn't like it, to fight against it. He shouldn't fear the future, but witness whether it creates despair or hope. Yuna on the ship now also hopes Koku will come rescue her, but Minetsuki wants her to wake up because Koku won't be able to fly to this height. Meanwhile, Keith's group is trying to locate the doctor. Kayla remembers her tracking app still works. She then asks Eric to access the satellite for her and successfully determines the direction the doctor went was towards the port. Kayla circles the suspicious locations for Keith to examine. After a while, he realizes the doctor may have taken a boat to a mental hospital at sea, because that place used to detain that criminal who bit his tongue, and since the doctor's father was in the Navy, he might be able to enter freely. He then closes his eyes to visualize and knows that after shaking off Boris, the doctor was driven by someone else to the port. He got on a boat and the boatman could be a mutant. When arriving at the hospital entrance, there were also guards here. When entering the hospital, he had given drugs to the mutants here to use and manipulate all of them. Then he put Lily's body in a bag and led her to the lair. Upon arrival, he may have killed a guard to bring the body in, but he soon dismisses this and redraws that when bringing the car in, he was let through by the guard and took Lily's body into the elevator and led her to the operating room. Keith then asks Kayla to check if the doctor has left according to the system, but he hasn't left yet. He asks how many times the doctor has worked overtime and how many victims match the characteristics he described. The 2 numbers match, making him suspect the doctor's lair seems to be here. He then asks Kayla to bring out the building plan for him. He then looks at the structure of the building over the past 300 years and realizes there are many loopholes in this building. He then asks Eric to unlock the handcuffs and go with him to the doctor's room to search. Everything looks normal here, but Keith finds traces of wheel marks inside. Looking at the pile of X-ray photos behind, Keith sees handprints touching it, so he presses it and opens a secret path. They both take the elevator down and burst in to find the place full of the best corpses the doctor uses for display. He has already run away. Keith looks around and finds the body of the doctor's father here, the first person he killed. He sees blood stains on the operating table and the doctor has called him. The doctor knows Keith has reached that room and compliments that Lily's body really resembles Keith's sister. He wants the doctor to do whatever he likes because he knows Lily isn't dead yet as they arrived quite early. Keith thinks he's different from before because now he has teammates. Now let him run, but he'll find him soon. The doctor is really counting on him and hangs up. He then shoots dead 2 policemen to take their car. Meanwhile, Keith and Eric find a room full of corpses with Lily among them. Upon checking, Lily was only injected with drugs, so they quickly take her out and call the hospital. Eric asks Kayla to seal off the surrounding area and also finds the path the doctor used to escape. Keith now discovers Lily has some kind of pill in her mouth. The doctor then calls Minetsuki, but the man wearing a hat and glasses answers instead and informs him they're busy now so can't help him. The doctor then realizes he can't win against Keith. After seeing the image of Keith's sister leaving him, he decides to write the ending with Keith. Koku has now jumped off the cliff to fly into the sky, while Keith has solved the clue the doctor left in the pill. He has taken out an old box and assembled a gun to finish this. Lily has now woken up and met Bran. He tells her she's been asleep for a few hours. Remembering Keith is putting an end to this himself, she asks Bran where her things are. Minetsuki is now torturing Yuna to make her submit to him, but that man has come to call him and inform that the person they're waiting for has arrived. He releases Yuna and goes to greet Koku. The hat-wearing man knows Minetsuki has gone mad and lets him stall Koku for a while. Koku has now flown up and is about to shatter when he sees the hidden ship among the stars. He uses his sword to cling to the ship and sneaks in. The hat-wearing man has injected the yellow drug into Yuna, and her hair has turned white. He knows the show is about to begin and the Black-Winged King is about to ascend. Minetsuki has been waiting for him here. He plans to deal with him to become the king of all things. Eric and the others are trying to take the bodies the doctor embalmed here to take away. Suddenly, Lily calls and asks where Keith is. They think Keith is at the hospital with her, but Bran informs that Keith left 3 hours ago. Lily remembers the doctor put a capsule in her mouth and Keith took it. Hearing this, the whole group rushes off urgently. Koku is now fighting relentlessly with Minetsuki. He corners him and lunges to strike, but he dodges in time. They continue to fight and Koku successfully breaks his sword. He then asks where Yuna is, but he doesn't remember who Yuna is. He doesn't even remember who he is. Koku realizes this is a symptom of a mutant, and he's not the real Minetsuki. Years ago, Minetsuki used another person with the same eye color as him as a body double. Minetsuki used a right eye similar to Koku's to erase memories and create a copy of himself. This fake now wants to know who he is. He realizes Koku's eye is very similar to what he once saw before. He then frantically wants to know who he is and rushes at Koku. So Koku finishes him quickly in one strike. The real Minetsuki has now taken Yuna away from the balloon by helicopter. Keith is now sitting waiting for the ship and decides to burn the only clue. Koku is looking for Yuna, and when he reaches that room, he discovers the sign Yuna left and knows she's still waiting for him. Minetsuki has then taken Yuna back to the original place. Keith is on the ship while the clock is still counting down. When the countdown ends, the entire balloon explodes. Keith then calls the doctor and knows where he is. The doctor is at their old school, reviewing memory footage. Lily's group is on the way to find Keith and knows he can only go to one place, where his sister was murdered. Keith asks the doctor about who helped him, and the answer is as Keith predicted the mutants. He tells Keith that the leader of the attack years ago was him. He had seduced Minetsuki to kill Keith's father and deceived him to make him believe wholeheartedly. The reason Minetsuki didn't use control on him was because Minetsuki himself was the one being controlled by him. He told Minetsuki that if he could kill Koku, he would become the new king. But everything from the beginning had been arranged for Koku to become king. Keith doesn't know how many more lives he intends to play with, but his purpose in life is to kill so that Keith will hunt him down. He believes that both of them are cursed bloodlines with their own purposes, and now it's time for one of them to end. Koku has now descended to the ground. He's still alive but severely injured, and his sword is broken. Minetsuki is waiting for him at the stone monument along with Yuna. He believes that he has always been Koku's shadow, his existence not mentioned on the stone monument because he was just a stepping stone for Koku. When Koku becomes king, he will be discarded as worthless, and thanks to the doctor, he has determined to change his fate by taking everything from Koku. Yuna believes that Koku won't lose to him, but he thinks she's misunderstanding. He doesn't want to become Koku's replacement and have her. He pulls out a knife, stabs Yuna, and decides he will become himself a king who doesn't need a priestess by his side. Koku senses that Yuna is in danger and rushes there. Keith had previously warned Koku not to go near the stone monument, as all Black-Winged Kings throughout history have been defeated by humans there, so it's possible that the stone drains his regenerative abilities, but now he has no choice but to go. Minetsuki intentionally let her live until this moment so that both could die here, and he will carve the existence of a new king in this place. Keith has now exposed all of the doctor's plans about how humans created the mutants and released them throughout the world. His father was the head of that project, but later changed his mind, so he killed him for being too weak. He then continued and created more mutants from his victims. He let Minetsuki control their minds and turn them into killers, and then had Market Maker clean up and build their reputation. But then his ultimate goal probably wasn't for any ideals. The doctor sees that Keith indeed knows almost everything, and he thinks Keith is also approaching Koku to use him the same way he used Minetsuki. Koku has now come down to the stone monument and asks what happened to Yuna, but he won't let Yuna die until she sees him kill Koku. Keith wants the doctor not to lump them together, because he has no emotions. Every time he feels remorse for killing someone, his mind creates a new personality and discards the old one. Thus, he repeats his wrongdoings and becomes a real monster. Koku is now gradually losing to Minetsuki. Not being able to recover is too big an obstacle. He is slashed by Minetsuki several times, and finally, he pulls out a gun and shoots him a few times. He wants to see how Koku fights back against fate. Meanwhile, the doctor has stepped towards Keith, and he has pointed a gun at him. But he's not afraid, because everyone has now arrived outside. They all hope Keith won't pull the trigger because then he would also be a murderer like him. The doctor has explained that the reason he killed Keith's sister was because he once thought he would fight the madness within himself if he had Keith's sister by his side. But she fell in love with her own brother, so he had no other choice. Although Keith is very angry, he has decided not to fire. So he pointed the gun to the side to see who would enter first. It might be Lily. Keith starts to worry and wants him to stop. But when Lily's voice gets closer, he has no other choice. Minetsuki has now shot Koku dozens of times and nailed his hands to the wall. He approaches Yuna and intends to let her and Koku go at once. Just as he pulls out the knife, Koku angrily shouts. He pulls himself off the wall and rushes to dodge bullets, but Minetsuki was waiting and swings a sword to cut off his hand. But he doesn't give up and runs to make him chase, and when he realizes it, Koku has turned his leg into a sword to fight back. He realizes this is the white-haired one's leg, and indeed it had an effect for a moment. His head was then separated from his neck. As for Keith, he had to shoot the doctor. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Keith had to abandon reason to kill someone. He has 4 seconds after his brain is shot, but those 4 seconds are enough for him to witness this moment. It could be said that Keith won, but at the same time, he also lost to his best friend. Koku and Yuna have now left and disappeared. 3 months have passed. Keith has vanished again, and the investigation team believes Keith will return today because Lily herself has gone to pick him up. The market maker incident has been exposed to the world, causing a commotion. Kayla knows that when Keith returns, they will have more interesting cases. Keith is now being dragged away by Lily. She brought a rope to restrain him in case he resists, but he throws the rope away. She bought a new car, but Keith criticizes it as ugly and wants to walk, yet he's still dragged into the car. Lily has spent time researching the satisfied smile of the doctor at the moment of his death. She thinks that besides the doctor feeling he had won against Keith, it seems that Smile was also content with being able to die and end his own madness. Keith believes that regardless of the truth, he is still the loser. He's not bitter because he and the doctor were just one person posing a riddle and one solving it. Afterwards, they meet Koku and Yuna again and give them a ride. The film ends